Every January, the gym looks packed. People sign up with big plans, tell themselves they'll start when motivation arrives, and then that day never comes. Membership cards sit unused and routines dissolve into excuses. You scroll past a bookmark course and promise to begin next week. The more you wait for inspiration, the bigger and scarier the task feels, so you put it off again and again until the idea cools into regret. Waiting is a slow trap. Motivation is emotional and fickle. It shows up in bursts and disappears without warning. So relying on it as the spark means projects stall before they ever leave the driveway. Small actions break the loop. A 2-minute habit, a single sentence written, or one email sent lowers the barrier, creates a little momentum, and makes the next step obvious. By the end, you'll see the pattern that causes people to stay stuck and the tiny tweak that gets things moving without needing motivation first. The myth of motivation. You stand at the sink with a dish in your hand and decide you'll only start when you feel like it. It happens more than people admit, waiting for a mood to change and letting the dishes pile up instead. That small pause grows into a pattern because the feeling you expect rarely arrives on cue, and the task moves from doable to daunting simply through delay. People assume motivation is a fuel they either have or don't, but action often creates that fuel. When someone puts on running shoes just to try and jogs for 10 minutes, they usually feel energized afterward and want to keep going. The reverse happens too. Sitting and waiting rarely produces that same rush, so the intended behavior never gets its chance to spark the reward that follows effort. Environment and tiny habits matter more than a dramatic internal shift. Leave a notepad open on the table and you'll notice people jot ideas down more often. Hide the notepad and the ideas slip away. Reducing friction, like packing a gym bag the night before or setting a single blank document open on your screen, changes the probability that motion will start, and once motion starts, the brain hands out small rewards that look a lot like motivation. Believing you must feel motivated first creates a lot of lost time. Job hunters who only apply when they feel ready send far fewer resumes than those who set slots to work on applications. And writers who wait for inspiration miss drafts they could have revised later. Small, repeatable behaviors produce visible progress, and visible progress is what people then mislabel as sudden motivation. How waiting becomes a habit. Picking up your phone before you open a document shows how cues shape behavior. Repeated cues push simple actions into automatic habits. That loop, cue, routine, reward, is how the brain turns choices into shortcuts, and it doesn't ask permission. One quick check gives a small, immediate reward, and repetition stitches that reward into expectation. Over time, the same situation triggers the same response without much thought. That sense of waiting for motivation often comes from the way the brain prioritizes immediate rewards over delayed ones. A social feed gives a tiny hit of pleasure right away, while starting a report promises something useful down the road but not now. So the immediate reward reinforces the delay, and the delay gets easier the next time. Concrete example. You open email first, respond to easy things, and the big project sits untouched because the small wins feel better in the moment. There's also the toll that decision-making takes. Choosing to start something costs mental energy, and energy is finite, so avoidance becomes the low-effort default. After a long day of decisions at work, saying first I'll do it later is simply less taxing in the short run. Repeating that choice trains the brain to expect postponement, and the more you postpone, the more automatic the postponement becomes. Environment and social cues play their part too, and they're sneaky. When coworkers regularly push tasks to tomorrow, or your living room is set up for lounging rather than working, the setting quietly nudges you toward delay. The consequence is predictable. Context cues plus social modeling make waiting feel normal, and normal is hard to unsee. Small postponements accumulate into a pattern that feels like being stuck rather than a series of choices. One skipped workout leads to another, one delayed email becomes a backlog, and each instant strengthens the mental shortcut of not now. The result is a habitual loop where waiting is the default response to any task that requires effort. The power of tiny, repeatable actions. There's that quiet nag when a project sits untouched on your to-do list because you're waiting to feel like it. That hesitation costs more than time. Starting with tiny, repeatable actions shifts a task from abstract to concrete, and that shift alone lowers the energy needed to begin. For example, writing a single paragraph each morning makes the blank page less terrifying, and over days the paragraphs become a manuscript without a dramatic burst of inspiration ever being required. When big goals feel overwhelming, people freeze instead of moving. That paralysis comes from imagining the whole journey instead of the first step. So breaking a goal into the smallest possible action, One push-up, one sentence, 1 minute of practice removes the barrier created by scale. A friend who wanted to run again began by just stepping outside in running shoes. The step itself was tiny, but repeating it turned an occasional idea into a routine that made longer runs possible. There's a real change in how your brain treats a habit once it's repeated even a few times. Small wins create a kind of momentum. The effort to continue becomes lower than the effort to restart after stopping. That's why automatic systems work. People who set up an automatic transfer to savings end up saving consistently without relying on willpower. The mechanical repetition creates a new default, and that default reduces the need for sudden bursts of motivation. Perfectionism and high standards often hide behind the excuse of first I'll wait until first I'm ready. That tension keeps tasks in limbo. Making an action purposely tiny defangs the critic. It's hard to argue with doing a single line in a draft or one set of a stretch. Simple environmental cues help too. Leaving a notebook on the kitchen counter, placing resistance bands next to the TV, or keeping a guitar on a stool. Those small changes make the repeatable action obvious and easy to choose. Keeping track of tiny actions makes them visible and meaningful. Checking a box, marking a calendar, or noting a sentence in a running log turns repetition into a record, and that record feeds back into motivation in a gentle way. Over time, the accumulation is undeniable. Small, consistent steps produce real outcomes without waiting for motivational fireworks. Building systems that ignore your mood. People's energy and mood fluctuate throughout the day, and that variability is why relying on motivation to start anything is a shaky plan. One morning you can feel unstoppable. The next you hit snooze 3 times because your brain decides it would rather avoid discomfort. That split-second judgment about whether something feels worth it depends on how you feel in that moment, not on the importance of the task. The result is predictable. Projects stall, workouts get skipped, bills get delayed, and the things you care about become episodic. This is where systems that ignore mood make a difference. A system rearranges the environment and the decision flow so the momentary feeling no longer controls the outcome. For example, autopay takes the monthly bill decision away. The payment happens whether someone feels like logging in or not. Meal kits or prep lunches eliminate the what should first eat decision when hunger lowers resolve. An alarm that automatically starts a playlist and turns on a lamp removes the extra friction of dragging yourself out of bed. Those are concrete changes that reduce the need for on-the-spot motivation. Small design choices add up fast because they change the path of least resistance. Leaving running shoes by the door and a gym bag loaded in the trunk makes showing up easier than coming up with an excuse. Putting floss next to the toothbrush and keeping a 2-minute timer on the bathroom counter makes flossing more likely than arguing with yourself. Scheduling a recurring calendar block labeled Write, 15 minutes, and adding a draft template means a writer often only has to open the document rather than invent a starting sentence. Each tweak funnels behavior toward consistency by removing choices that mood would otherwise control. Systems also benefit from cheap feedback and low-friction adjustments, so they stay useful instead of becoming rigid chores. A weekly check-in on a shared calendar or a glance at an automated habit tracker shows whether the system is working. If the gym bag trick stops working because evening meetings moved earlier, shifting the loaded bag to the office locker keeps the momentum. Automations like IFTTT or Zapier that save receipts to a folder or forward important emails reduce busy work and preserve focus for when energy is actually needed. When systems handle the routine and adapt to small changes, the outcome no longer depends on how someone feels for 5 minutes each day. Stories that show doing comes before feeling. Small, visible action often changes how you feel about a task. A friend first know, Maria, would sit on her couch convinced she needed motivation to start running. She would scroll for an hour instead. One evening she put on her running shoes while still thinking about excuses. The first 5 minutes were awful, but by the time she hit the 2nd kilometer her posture eased and the rhythm quieted her inner critic. That tiny step, shoes on, door open, made the feeling follow the doing. The gap between intention and motion can feel huge. Alex had been a guitarist for years but waited for inspiration to write new songs, and blank pages piled up. He started playing scales at random, no goal, just sound under his fingers. A riff surfaced from repetition and he hummed it until words slid in. Action loosened the block. The practice didn't feel heroic. It simply fed possibility and then the mood arrived. Sometimes the first sentence is all it takes. A writer first know set a rule to type 1 sentence a day when he was jammed, and at first he hated it. He would stare, force one sterile line, and then allow himself a coffee break. That sentence often breathed into 2. then a paragraph, and before long a draft existed where there had been only dread. The movement of fingers created a tiny proof of progress, and proof shifted the emotion away from paralysis. Mood also follows changes in space and routine. A friend living in a cramped flat cleared a single counter because the mess made her anxious, not the other way around. She moved a stack of papers, wiped the surface, and the sunlight felt different on the clear wood. That small tidy corner invited her to sit and sketch for 10 minutes, which turned into an hour of focused work. Clearing a spot didn't magically grant inspiration. It removed a barrier and let doing produce the feeling of possibility. You know that tiny pause before you begin, the one where you wait to feel motivation. Waiting for that feeling is exactly what keeps most people stuck. You stare at a blank document and scroll, tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, and then the day is gone. The core idea is simple. Motivation is unreliable, but small consistent actions change your state. Break a task into a 2 or 5 minute step, lower the friction, and momentum follows. Maybe you've promised yourself first I'll do it later a dozen times. That habit of postponing creates a list of half-finished intentions that grows heavier with every excuse. When you swap waiting for action, opening a file, setting a 2-minute timer, making a quick outline, it interrupts the loop and suddenly the task feels doable instead of impossible. Small actions often feel almost silly at first. Open a document for 5 minutes and you might stop after 2, or you might keep going. Make a cup of coffee and the morning task becomes real. Tidy one corner and the rest looks easier. Those tiny wins reduce resistance, and because you actually move, your brain supplies its own motivation afterward. If this landed for you, there are more short videos that walk through simple, repeatable ways to start. Nothing flashy, just examples you can try next time you hesitate. If you want to see those, the channel posts weekly, and the comment thread is full of people swapping what tiny actions work for them. Tomorrow doesn't have to be different in a dramatic way. Next week, first I'll show a straightforward 5-minute start routine and a real-world example of turning a tiny habit into steady progress. First I'll be figuring it out with you, one small step at a time.